Welcome to the Future of Teamwork podcast. My name's Dane Groeneveld, CEO of Huddle 3 Group, and I'm glad to be welcoming Mea Thompson onto the show for today. Mea, welcome.
Hi, Dane. Thank you for having me.
It's been really cool getting to know you this last couple of weeks around the Unconnected. But before we kind of jump into what you're doing with that organization, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your personal and business background.
Sure. Okay. So the Unconnected aside, because we will talk about that more later. So I'm a bit of a tech geek, very much a tech geek. I worked in the telecom space for 10 plus years. I won't say the exact number to give away the age, but I worked in the telecoms for a long time. And I actually recently heard that if you don't want to talk to people at the party and they ask what you work with, you just say telecoms, because the conversation always dies with that. But that is my passion. I'm trying to find new strategic digital ways of bringing telecoms into more people's hands. So that's my focus. Yeah.
That's awesome. How did you find your way into the telecoms industry?
Oh, it's a good story, but I will tell it very short. So I was actually backpacking around Australia. My original thought was that I wanted to go to med school. And then I took a gap year and I was backpacking around Australia, and I was working in this little cafe on one of these main roads. And this one guy kept down all the time getting a coffee. And in the end, he said, do you want to come up and run my call center at that time? And I was like, sure. And that is how I got into telecom. So really at the bottom of the bottom. And then I've just worked with so many amazing companies in so many amazing countries. So yeah, that's how it started. And that's why my kind of study field changed from medical to telecom.
That's neat. That's really cool. It's amazing how many people's careers were forged in a bar or in a cafe where they met someone. And where you can go from those early beginnings. So you moved from the call center, further into the telecoms industry. Tell me a little bit more about the types of businesses you've run, the types of roles that you've played, the teams you've been a part of.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So I've run teams, as mentioned, in Australia, and then I moved on from being more operational into the more strategic teams. So after that, I've ran teams in Malaysia, in New Zealand, in Canada, in Singapore, in Sweden. So I've ran teams in a lot of various locations around the world. And when you asked me to join this podcast to talk about teamwork, I got really excited because, the experience from teamwork is so different depending on where you are working with teams, whether you're working with teams in your professional life or in your personal life, and also the location of the teams where they're located. So it's a bit of a nuance. But it's all been around telecom the whole time. But yeah.
That's cool. And when you've been working with those teams, it's a lot of countries you just listed off. Mm-hmm. Have you had teams all in one location, or have you had teams that are sort of multi-locational?
Both. So normally we're at a stage that's where the biggest team is, but that is also interesting now with the connectivity, coming back into the connectivity, is that now the world is so open. So you can work with teams all over the world. And for example, me and the other founder of the Unconnected, we work daily with each other for a year and a half. And we used to joke and say, I talk to him more than I talk to my husband. But I didn't see him in person until after almost 2 years when we met at the Ukraine border in Romania. It's been both. It
is really cool the way we have been able to forge teams virtually, particularly through COVID. Maybe you touched on it again there, meeting your business partner there in Romania. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you forged the Unconnected as a charity and what the mission is?
Absolutely. So, I mentioned I worked in telecom for 10 years and I realized, as good as it is, my job was really to make rich people richer by finding better strategic ways of running their businesses, strategic add-ons or other ways that they can grow their business. So that was my job. And then I realized, hold on a second. And this is no ding at any specific operators, but operators work in a way where they are focusing on the ROI in the most profitable areas. which means that there is a lot of people that's being left out within their strategies and their visions. And that's normal. So I'm not pushing down on them in any way, but that is, what I saw when I was working with them. So it affected me. And then at the same time, my father passed away, and my father passed away very young. He was 58. And if there was a person that was even more tech nerdy than I was, it was my dad. And he knew that I wasn't happy in the role that I had at the time. And he told me, go and do what you want to do, Mea, do something else. And I was like, no, this is a good job. And then when he passed very, very suddenly out of nowhere, I realized, okay, well, if I'm going to do something, I have to do it now. Like, I want to do something and to make a proper difference to the world. And then I started thinking, where are my skills? Like, how can I make a difference with the skill sets that I have, and with the knowledge, and with the teams that I worked with, and with the contacts that I have in the industry? So I realized if I need to focus somewhere, it needs to be where my expertise and my partners are, my network. And that is how we got into the Unconnected, because we know so many people in the industry already. We know how big this issue is that we're trying to solve, and we knew we can rally people around us. That's how it started. But you shouldn't need to take the passing of a close relative for someone to, take action. But for me, that's what's needed. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a great story, a sad story too, obviously, on the passing of your father. And I know when we face the loss of others or mortality, it often creates a little more focus around, well, what is the legacy that we're leaving? And, what would my future self want me to be doing right now? If I'm looking back in 10 years, have I really achieved that? We've talked about that a couple of times with different people in recent weeks. It's becoming a much more important thing, I think, to humanity at large, what legacy we're leaving behind, because we now live in a remarkable world where there is a lot of opportunity. It's not just about, for many of us who are fortunate to have the expertise, the networks you referenced, it's not just about putting a roof over the heads of our family or food on the table. It's about what we can do in our communities. You touched on this big problem. Perhaps you could quantify it. I know you and I were talking some numbers earlier about the number of people on this planet that don't have access to the internet, for example.
Yeah. Well, the official number when we talk about the unconnected, it's 3.2 billion people. So it's almost half of the world's population, which is unconnected, which means that they haven't had connectivity at all for a set amount of time. And that is a huge chunk. Obviously, they've got no access to digital tools, to online banking, to all these things that we take for granted. But then on top of that, there is a huge dark number of people who live in an area where they potentially could get connection. They get connection if they go past, Wi-Fi's hotspot somewhere, which means that they're not classed as unconnected, but they don't own a device potentially, and they don't have internet at home. So 3.2 billion is a small number, I would say. Look at the big whole of what we're trying to focus on.
Yes. And that's a lot. You mentioned it, access to banking. We talked about the other day, access to education and education tools. I mean, it's a lot of opportunity that people don't have access to if they don't have that digital connection. What do you see as your main hotspots, focus areas, I guess the demographics of people and the geographies of people that you're most able to jump in and help through the Unconnected?
Well, when we first started the Unconnected and started running projects, we were running projects globally, all the projects that we can kind of get hold of and solve. And then we realized as this was growing and evolving, we need to be more focused in the way that we're working. So that is why we created the 4 themes, which we're working under now, which is connecting women. Because digital gender equality is a huge problem. Then we've got connecting students. We've got connecting refugees. That's why I mentioned we were at the Ukraine border, and then connecting vulnerable communities. And then we run projects under all of these, and we're trying potentially not to focus on the completely remote, unconnected areas. because that's very costly for us to connect. It's easier for us to connect that grey mass that I was talking about before that's got access to connectivity, but they can't afford it. Or for whatever reason, they don't understand it. They don't have the knowledge how to use it. Those, it's easier for us to get connected quicker. But in saying that, we work on both levels. But yeah, my heart question is to connect women. We're trying to run projects to make sure that the digital gender gap is closing, even though it could be a cultural issue as well, which is harder for us to work with. But yeah, connecting students and refugees. Yeah,
that's neat. When you think about projects you're doing either now with the Unconnected or you've done in the past with your for-profit jobs, what is your definition of good teamwork?
Oh, nice. I should probably have thought of an answer to that, knowing what the title of this podcast is. But I think it sounds bad, but the older I get, the more I realize that the people that you want to work with, that you really click with, are potentially not the best people to have on your team.
That's interesting.
So I think, and let me explain, because the people that I work really well with are similar to me.
Yes.
But the projects that I've run and the work that I've done that's been most successful is when I'm working with people who are opposites to me. And then the issue there is that I know that this is going to be a great outcome of this project, even though I hate this person's guts, for example, because we're so different and we're just bickering all the time. But the more you learn how to adapt to the people that you might not be as similar to, the better teamwork and the better outcome. So I think that's one of the learnings that I've had, is that just because you think that someone is a bit of I might say the word, that means that you most probably need to find a way to work with that person, because that's going to give you the best outcome. If that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And we've been reading a lot and talking a lot about the importance of diversity on teams, diversity of thought, diversity of perspective, diversity of skill sets. And now more than ever, I think that's more available because we can digitally connect with people who might not be in our local group or network. And two, more important, because we're serving much bigger, whether it's customer groups or geographies or problems, where it's not as simple and straightforward as maybe once upon a time it may have been to run a small business that had a very obvious customer and an obvious product. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just that ability to adapt, I think that's the key, because you want people to adapt around you to get the team to work. But for example, if you run a team in Malaysia in the telecom industry, which is mostly male, middle-aged males, you need to adapt to that team differently than if you're working in a in a team in Sweden when there is 50-50 men and women. And it's not about getting the team to adapt to you. Well, they have to in a sense, but it's also how do you adapt to the team? And you will be able to get your thoughts and your visions and your ideas and how to work forward. And that's something that I think, not to make this into like female-male conversation, but it's also really interesting to see the roles that you take in a team. If it's an industry such as, for example, telecommunication, where it's, mostly males, or if I worked for the last few years, I worked in marketing organizations where there is majority females. So the teams and the structure and the dynamic is different. And you need just to make sure that you need to adapt, but you can't just give up everything that you are and, to take a different role than what you should have.
Yeah, I saw a great poster on that the other day talking about innovation and co-innovation and teamwork. And I think one of the first premises of the whole model was you've got to embrace, I think they used the word conflict, but I think what they were getting at was you've got to embrace people's opinions and you've got to encourage everyone to speak up so that you don't create that echo chamber of everyone who's used to working together doing it in the one way. There's so many different ways to solve problems, but starting from that point of giving people a voice and really giving honor to their perspective as you talk about it as a group can be a good foundation for teamwork and for scoping out how you're going to go about solving whatever the problem of the day is.
Yeah, no, I totally agree there. And even though you don't agree with everyone, because you're never going to,
yeah,
that's just how it works. You just have to accept it and see there from their point of view. And it's almost sometimes like I've got a 4-year-old son at home. So it's almost like you have to pick your battles. Like, what's really important here? What do we need to agree on to get this project to move forward? And that's what you're focusing on. But luckily, I've worked in so many amazing teams lately where everyone is just so aligned, full of motivation, no self-pity, just really go get it, people. So that is just incredible. And especially within the Unconnected, because everyone's got their eyes on the mission.
Yeah, that helps a lot.
Oh, yeah. And people can see that you don't need to go and, start a charity to make an impact or run a marathon or whatever. Like, the impact that you can make can start at home, and you don't need to wait for a big event until you go and do something. Every single action that you take will create an impact. So I think that's kind of the mindset that we all should have on top of what we're doing already.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you mentioned your 4-year-old at home. I also have a 4-year-old, Waverly. And,
then you know about picking your battles.
It is about picking your battles. She picks a lot of battles. So I've got to remember every now and again what the mission is of the day or of the month and not get caught up in the moment. But, that's true at work too. We're all, I think, coming out of COVID, a lot of us are very Zoom fatigued. We've managed to put a lot more work into the day. We're tackling a wider range of problems. The workday is not as contained as it once was when we're in offices. So being aware of your emotions in that team environment, particularly early on, can be really important. And setting a tone of, I guess, some vulnerability, some honesty, so that people kind of know where you're at on a given day, because, they might be waking up fresh in the morning. You may have had a terrible day and it's the end of your day. And so I guess checking in on that is a key part of getting that teamwork going right in the first place too. Absolutely.
And what you're saying there about respecting each other, whether if you're different or not, that's the key thing into getting any teamwork done, whether it's, a relationship with your spouse or teamwork at work. But I also think that the remote working has, in a sense, brought me further away from some of my colleagues that I would work with, but it also brought me closer to others, because we've been working from home. Right now I'm sitting in a hotel room, but we've been working from home for so long with each other, and I've seen their kids, I've seen their spouses walking in the back, their dogs is, barking. And so it's almost like you know them in a better way because you've been visiting them in their home environment for, a year. And now suddenly we're back into sterile offices or hotel rooms where you don't really know who they are, in a sense. So for some teams, I think it might have been better as well. And it brought people closer because you see who they are.
Absolutely it did. Yeah, we saw that. We did a number of happy hours through COVID where we bring all of our staff on, and we do it on a Friday afternoon, which, here in California might have been 2:30 p.m., but in Florida, it might have been 5:30 p.m. So you saw people's, they might have had their husband or wife working beside them in a shared office. They may have had a kid that was home by then, a dog, and it was fun. It was a good way to just be human and connect on that level without the stresses and strains of the work. Have you seen, as you've been building the mission, the values around the teams that you're a part of, have you seen any particular, I don't want to say silver bullets, but really key sort of routines or rituals that are starting to, create part of your team's work program and way of being together?
Well, I think like what you said earlier is so important there, just to have the check-ins. To see how people actually feel. I think that is so important. And that shows as well that I think management in some cases have stepped back a bit and let their teams take more responsibility to get things done. So there's no one
Yes.
checking over your shoulder, and you've gotten more freedom to do what you need to do, which is great. But that's why those check-ins are so important as well, to keep the team together, even though you're working apart. So I'm
Yes.
hoping that that's going to stay going forward. And again, circling back to another thing that we talked about before is to make sure that everyone's voice gets heard. Because you've hired that person for a reason. That person is on your team for a reason. And if you don't invite that person to speak and take their space into the discussion, you are literally the one that's losing out, because you're losing money.
Yes.
Either you hired the wrong person that potentially shouldn't have nothing to give to the team, and that's fine, because that person will have something to give in a different team. But if you have them on your team, you need to get them to take space. And that's also another important thing that I think COVID has really showed us.
Taking space is a really cool concept too, because there's a tangibility to it. People often, a lot of us are doing knowledge work, and so it's easy to think of it as spaceless in some ways. But in a meeting, are there ways that you encourage someone to take space? Are there ways that manifests itself?
No, I think you need to be careful with that as well, because we're talking about equity here in a sense, and not equality. So everyone shouldn't be speaking the same amount of time in a meeting, because that doesn't work for everyone. Someone might not want to talk at all, but you can see that that person is listening and taking notes and getting ideas that they're going to bring back later. So I think in a meeting is very much about knowing your team and managing the team that you have at hand, instead of getting everyone to speak equally. But everyone needs to have the same ability to speak. Would they want to, or would they want to share something? I think that's key.
I know I'm a part of a Vistage group here in California, and we meet about once a month. There's about 12 to 15, CEOs, presidents in the room. And naturally, you got a lot of bright people, a lot of charged egos all in the room. and what you say about not everyone having the same amount of time is critical. I think our process there, we've got a really good mentor who facilitates the conversations, who sets ground rules, and it's a real mix of art and science, making sure that you coordinate that team. And going back to your earlier point, that you really capitalize upon the talent that's there at the table, and don't let any one person or one agenda item sort of drive the day.
Yeah. And for that, you need a really good moderator, especially if you're moderating, CEOs or sales conversation, because then it's hard for people to speak up, even if they want to sometimes.
You got to be pretty strict.
You have to be very strict and sometimes a bit rude with cutting people off. But that's also a part of running a team, making sure to lead those discussions, because the end goal with teamwork is really to create a good project or product, or, you need to get somewhere. So it's not just about meeting and having fun and, getting along, like it's producing. And having fun whilst producing. So it's a bit of a gentle balance there sometimes. But
I agree.
But just to throw a question back to you, though, because you've ran teams smaller and larger. So where would you say, because the hierarchy in various parts of the world is different depending where you run a team. If you run a team in Sweden, it's very flat organization, and you can go out with the boss after Friday and have a beer and it's fine. If you run teams in other parts of the world, the hierarchy is so huge that as soon as you become a leader or running teams, you get very lonely. So what's your experience in that, from being a part of a team to running teams?
It's a good question. I would say I've generally tended towards bringing a lot of fun into the room. You talked about the need to perhaps be structured or strict or rude at times to get teams moving in the right way. I think you buy yourself a lot of currency, trust, if you can be vulnerable, if you can bring some fun to the room first, and make sure that everyone knows that we're people before we're team members and after we're team members. So we've done a lot of cool stuff particularly when we're working across multicultural teams, going in and spending time to, experience someone else's culture. It might be going into certain restaurants, going to participate in certain holy events. I think games, I love games. So we've always tried to start our team building off with something as simple as a word game as an icebreaker, or as complex as, hey, let's have a table tennis competition or something else, just to, level the stakes. Mm-hmm. And another one of my personal favorites is dressing up. I like to put costumes on. So, whether I'm dressed up as a Viking or a Buzz Lightyear or a leprechaun on St. Patrick's Day.
Does everyone dress up, or is it just you?
We try. Yeah. Sometimes it's just me. But we try and do a lot of company events where we actually say, hey, we're going to have an award today for whichever team does the best Halloween theme. And post all your photos, and we'll do some real-time happy hour or real-time voting or whatever we do. But a lot of it is just about those human elements, because the structure is the structure, and certain things aren't going to change quickly. Like you mentioned, some countries are very flat, some countries are very hierarchical. You can't just go and bust that up, because if you go into a hierarchical team and you try and make everyone on the same level, you've just disrupted them to no end. So yeah, it's. I think the one leveler is that we're all humans, and the more we realize that, the better.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there is some interesting comments. I ran a team in Malaysia, so I lived in Malaysia for 3 months to start this team up before I moved to another place. And that team was so interesting, and I learned so much from that team, because I came in. This was like 8 years ago, so I came in kind of green into this, which was great, because a lot of these things that potentially it didn't go so well, and when you look back and say, I should change the way that I act next time. Yeah. That was one of those episodes. There were I came in thinking that the team will have to adapt for me. I'm a strong female. And then I was like, I could have still been a strong female, ran the team slightly different for the outcome to be better. So I think you learn all the time, though, how to. And that respect for your team members are so important. So I love when you said that you go and visit, do their holy days, their religions, you learn more. They brought me back about a big team meeting that we had, and they start talking about arranged marriages. And this was in Malaysia as well.
Yes.
And they were all really for it. They thought it was great. And they were talking about, it's great. My parents know me the best, and they pick a groom for me that, will look after me and blah, blah, blah. And I was just sitting there like, what? Yeah. And that was because I was green in that position. Now it's different. You just have to see from people's visions, and you have to respect who they are and what they believe in. And when you do that, the teamwork is going to be a lot smoother. So you live and learn.
You definitely do. And actually, that's a really good story, the arranged marriages. I mean, clearly, different cultures have very different approaches to rites of passage in life and other things. And it's not always black and white on what's good, what's bad, what's ugly. And I think the problem is that in a world of so much information, we're also suffering from a lot of misinformation. And people go into an environment and they're confronted with something that is very different to what they know. And they take a position on it straight away. So I think some of the best teams that I've worked in have always been the types of teams that will ask a lot of what questions, wisdom questions. What does that mean? What does that, what role does it have in sort of your society, your family, these types of things? And just go and do a lot of listening first and foremost, because actually listening, whether it's something that is more spiritual or if it's something that's very structural in the workplace, it gives you a lot more context before you determine what position to take on it and how maybe to influence or not to influence, depending on what the right decision is.
Yeah, no, that's very, very true. And because that will create the dysfunctional teams And I don't want to, because we all worked in dysfunctional teams where you realize it's like, okay, we're getting nowhere. Either we're just having so much fun and we're not focusing on what we should be doing, because then they're all like me on the team, which I've learned is fun, but it's not very productive. Or you work in teams, which for other reasons are not so working so well. So I want to ask you the question as well. But for me, one of the big problems that I find in teams of some time is, I call it self-pity. It's, when people's been working too long in a place and they're tired. And there's one thing being tired and overworked and stressed, but then it's that thing when you share that with too many people of your team and it's spreading, like, and you need to stop that spreading somehow. So what are you, has that happened in teams that you worked in? And how do you deal with that when you feel like there is a dark thing spreading amongst the team now and everyone's suddenly getting really tired and overworked?
I appreciate you explaining that, because I did hear you reference self-pity earlier when you were talking about good teams that don't have self-pity. So now that you've explained that, it makes a lot of sense to me. We absolutely see that periodically in some teams. It comes and goes, and in other teams I've seen it really set in, which is really sad. But I think it can be a reaction to work culture. It can be a reaction to the market. Back in 2015, working in Houston, the oil price sunk from, I think, $140 at the end of 14 to $25 early in 15. And we were having to deliver bad news all day, every day. Unfortunately, your job's no longer there. Unfortunately, you have to take a 20% pay cut. And it was rough. And we were having to make layoffs within our own core team as well. And so that it kind of creeps in, that element of self-pity, that people are like, oh, we've worked so hard and this is how we're being treated. We never saw this coming. And ultimately, I think if it's something as structural as that, a recession or a change in a commodity price, you have to act quickly, and then you have to tell the survivors, we're doing this now so that we can keep making a difference, we can keep growing, we can keep a team together, because we're in sort of a battle state. That's very different, perhaps, from something that is a little less explicit, like a cultural issue that starts to develop between two teams, two departments. I've seen that too. You might have a sales team and then a service team, and they're starting to battle because the sales team are promising the moon all of the time, and then the service team are getting these customers coming in saying, I was told I'd get this. I think that one can be a little bit harder to pick up. But again, I think the key is acting on it, acknowledging that it exists, acknowledging that it's not healthy for any of us, and then starting to get the team together to perhaps say, well, what does good look like? What do we want this to look like, and how can we work back from it? And unfortunately, there's going to be times when some people are not going to make that transition because they've made up their minds, or they're not in a good place. It might not even be to do with work. It might be something that's going on at family or at home too. So it's definitely one of the harder elements of teamwork and managing teams, is having to deal with some of those challenges.
Yeah. And it seems like we always go around in this conversation coming back to the same outcomes, or our thoughts are very aligned, that the teams need a good team manager or a leader, not a manager, someone that can lead the team, that's got the eyes on the team, can see the changes in people, because people need support in various grades at various times of their career. So they will be able to pick that up and maybe not know 100% about the project or product, but it needs to be a good people person, because the people that you hire, they're the ones that's supposed to know everything about the project. So we've said that. And then we also talked about how the people in the teams need to be able to adapt to each other, respect each other, understand each other, being able to work with each other, even though potentially you don't like each other as much because you're clashing personalities, which is a good thing to have on a team. And then it's about, who and how should you step in if you see that a team is dysfunctional and it's not working. So it's such an interesting conversations, because
it is. Actually, the World Economic Forum did a 2020 Future of Jobs report, which talked about how many jobs are shifting towards machine versus human. And specifically, it talked about which skills will need to be developed in the future for humans to remain, relevant and central to the workplace. And a lot of them are the people skills. So I agree with that sort of summary you made there, Mea, which is, good leadership is important. Considering where people are at is important. Problem solving, it is a core ingredient of functional teamwork. And I think you'll see there in that top 10 skills that I think 6 or 7 of them are very human-centered skills that we need to keep bringing forward. And it's not that everyone's going to be the leader, but I think if we're going to create a human-centered design for the future of work, the future of teamwork, we kind of need to make leadership more accessible to different members of the team as the teams work together. It's not, I'm not responsible for managing this team or this product, but I'm responsible for living our mission, our values, and ensuring that this team stays on track. If I hear something or see something that someone else hasn't, particularly in a virtual team environment, or when teams are working across multiple teams, it's not just one person working with the same 3 people every week. They're jumping in and out of 5 teams as part of their job.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And what you talked about there about, getting the right team leaders in, that could be so tricky, because I know from I've been, working on the team leader space before, because you're stuck in the middle, right? You've got the management above you who's like hammering you with numbers and, hitting your targets and doing X, Y, Z. And then you got the team underneath you. It's kind of that you want to nurture and look after and do all those things you should be doing as a good leader, look out for them and hear them. But at the same time, you kind of get a bit squashed there. So it's about finding those right people that can do that. But it's not just about the teams here, it's about the management teams up here as well. And I think that is sometimes in companies what I've seen, that's the biggest, not dysfunction, but that could be the biggest gap between management down, instead of the teams working down here, the developers, the marketing, the sales, the support. Those teams kind of work good because they're focusing on getting good team leaders in to run those teams.
Yep.
But it's also the leadership from the top that I find really interesting when I come in and work in a new company, working as a consultant, to kind of really gauge and see, how is this working? Because they obviously like more revenue focused.
Very revenue focused, and there can be a big disconnect because they can often be top line revenue focused, but not necessarily customer focused. And I think in today's world, being customer focused isn't just the person who pays for and buys your product, because your employees are customers now more than ever. There's a talent shortage. So I think leadership, management, top management, executive management teams need to do a lot more listening too. They need to really understand what's happening in my team, what are my customers wanting, what are my competitors doing, because things are changing so fast, and people can up and leave. Technologies can change overnight. Customers' business models are changing. So, I agree with you. I think there is a disconnect there, particularly in larger organizations that struggle to be agile and innovate. And that's something that the best teams, I think, from the ground up, inform executive leadership as to what the sentiment is amongst those customer groups.
Yeah, I agree. And with saying that, I'm very glad at the moment with the Unconnected, because even though it's a lot of people involved with all the ambassadors and all the volunteers and everyone that kind of gathers around these projects, but it's still so small. And we've been able to keep the organization fairly flat, which I'm so thankful for. And I know I've seen it before when, startups really scale quickly. I worked for a few of them, and then they become unicorns, and, they try to build this teamwork so quickly underneath them to kind of scale as much as possible, as fast as possible. That's when it gets complicated.
Yeah, it does. It really does.
And one of those journeys are really interesting to follow from a teamwork perspective. the kind of startup journey for the first 3 years. So that really teaches you a lot about what not to do and what to focus on if you would do it yourself.
It's amazing how much we learn as humans from putting our hands on the hot stove rather than reading it in a book, right? The what not to do kind of leaves an imprint on your brain as to what you're going to do next. So I agree with that. Which is
sad as well, because you wanted those really like, oh, I did that freaking spot on. Like that thing that I did there, I will remember that and I will do it again. That doesn't stick as much as, oh, Mea, you remember when you said that then and there, or how you acted, like, don't do that again. That was stupid. So but we should really program our brain slightly different, shouldn't we?
Yeah, so, maybe in the future, the AI will be like augmenting our thinking there. Hey, remember that so-and-so's done exactly what you're about to do and it didn't work out well. It's funny.
We would have learned by now, looking at Ukraine, for example. It's guys, someone has already made that mistake. But maybe humans don't work like, and robots don't either. We bought a new lawn mower, one of those automatic ones with AI. It's shit. Like it goes into the same areas and gets stuck all the time. So not even robots get it right. Yeah.
No, it's robots and AI is still very early. I listened to a good podcast that explained them to me as an 18-month-old. They're going to grow into a productive 30-year-old, but right now they're toddlers, and we all know what toddlers are like to manage. The difference is that toddlers are generally cute, where the robots and AI isn't all that cute. So I think it's easy to take that lawnmower or that robotic vacuum cleaner and just throw it in the closet and say, I'm done with that.
I actually left mine out this morning as I left Sweden in the rain, stuck in the same location. I was like, you learn, you stay there all day until my husband comes home. I would never do that with my toddler though, but the robot, he was stuck out in the rain for the day.
It is fascinating seeing how technology is going to continue to play a role in our lives. And again, with the Unconnected, you get an opportunity to bring the right technology to people who need it. And, through the theme of this discussion, allowing those people to experience, what are the products, what are the learning opportunities, but also to allow service providers and product providers to their communities to know who they are. I think that's a big part of connecting people is right now, we all too often go in and say, this company has a great product which is going to solve the problems of this community, and they never even went in and asked the community what they needed or what was already there. So I'm really excited about what the projects that you're all doing with the Unconnected for that reason, is that it becomes more bidirectional, and hopefully we're going to see a lot more entrepreneurship and strengthening of family units and just positive community behaviors by extending a lot of that resource to those individuals.
I'm hoping so, and we've seen that already. The impact from the projects is so. I can talk about story after story about the meetings that we've had with the people who's been impacted of the projects that Partners has helped us run. I won't, but what I will do though is that I want to give a challenge to everyone who might listening in or tuning in or to this podcast. And this is a kind of hard challenge. We talked about it before when we talked about having access to internet banking and listening to Spotify or checking Netflix or the bus timetable and all these things that we keep taking our phone up to do, calling an Uber. So the challenge is called hashtag, because we're modern, Unconnect24. And that means that you will be able to challenge someone or yourself or your team or your family or your spouse or your child to disconnect from mobile data for 24 hours. So you're not allowed to use the internet for 24 hours. And
That's
then by doing so, it's when you talk about it, people's like, that's all right. I haven't checked my phone much today. So, well, you try it. And obviously I've tried it, and it's so much harder than you think. So challenge someone to Unconnect24. It's all information on their website, so you can go and have a look. and see how hard that is. And by doing so, you raise awareness about how it is to actually be unconnected. You get a maybe well-deserved digital detox. We all need that sometimes. And you can raise money for some really, really cool projects. So that challenge goes out to you all to test.
And so you can get people to sponsor you doing your Unconnect 24?
Exactly. Or people will probably sponsor you without you wanting it. That's the good part. So you've always have, that Fred or that Linda in the office who's constantly on Instagram or doing something. So those are the people you need to challenge, because that's when it becomes interesting. Or you just do it as a team effort. Your whole team do it for a day.
I'm going to do that in June. We're entering June tomorrow. We do a monthly challenge, and I'm going to do that for all of my employees. I think that's a great idea.
That's it.
Yeah.
People need to opt in though, to say, okay, I'm actually going to do this, and we'll see afterwards how many people that managed it. But I feel positive. That's going to be.
I think it'll be great. I'll share the data with you. We do an opt-in, so we've got a employee engagement app that we use.
Fantastic.
And every month we give people points if they choose to complete a challenge. So in 1 month it was Mindfulness March. So go and do some guided meditation and experience meditation and what it does for your wellness. Another month it was, Active April. And it was, go and be active with a colleague, a friend, or a family member outdoors because the weather's getting better. And we want to encourage people. At work, we all too often focus on the work outputs and not on the human outputs. So I think our June challenge could be, do the Unconnected 24. And if you complete it, you'll get the points. And then maybe share a story or an anecdote about what you realized on that day. And then I'll get that data and I'll share it with you.
Oh, that would be amazing. That would be great. Looking forward to getting that. Good luck.
For sure. No, thank you. Well, it's been great conversation, Mea. Lots of fun. And you've obviously had some fascinating experiences in your career to date, working with different teams around the world. So I thought some of your insights there were first class. And really excited to see what you continue to do with the Unconnected. It's a great mission. And, we're certainly excited to be part of it too. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your support, and best of luck in Unconnect 24. Thank you. And thanks for a great conversation. I can't believe how fast it's gone. So that flies was great. By. Yeah, flies by. Thanks, Dane. Thanks, Mea. See ya.